Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. My name is Juan Londoño and today's topic, do I need expensive glass? Let's get right into it. Before we get into today's topic, let's talk about a couple of things here. Back in the day, right? In the 80s. So here's my Canon F1. I'm going to remove this lens. This was a 50mm 1.8 lens. Now, this is not, it's not the end of the world here. Very simple prime lens. It's the lens that kind of came with every camera. I had a 1.2 version of this, and believe it or not, it wasn't much bigger. So what can I say about this lens? Well, it's mostly metal construction. I mean, there are some plastics on the outside, but it feels pretty solid. The 1.2 version felt a little more solid. Like I said, it's only a little bigger than this. There are fewer elements in these lenses back then. I mean, they weren't, so advanced as they are today. So there were fewer glass elements inside. And to be honest with you, they weren't the sharpest things in the world. Even the 1.2, I mean, it was a great lens, right? It was more expensive than this. This was probably a $125 lens, a $100 lens back in the 80s. And hasn't changed much from like the nifty 50 today, which is like 125 bucks. This was probably $100 back in the day. And this was, the nifty 50 back then, right? And it wasn't as sharp as it is today. And, we didn't have a problem with that. I'm putting this thing back on the camera. We didn't have a big problem with that. It's what everybody used. Even that 1.2 version, which was kind of like the pro version, comparing it to today's lenses, you can't. Now let's fast forward today, right? This, and of course this has a lens hood on it. We can remove that. And so this is a 35mm 1.2, and this is an L series lens. When you compare the two lenses, right? There's a big, I'm trying to cover the camera so it doesn't, So there's a big difference with these two lenses. But what you have to remember too is this is a 35mm, which tends to be wider anyway, right? But it's a 1.4, so even more so. The mouth of this thing is a lot bigger, right? It's got a big mouth. So this is an L series lens, right? This is a pro lens. That other one was not. This is definitely solid. You can feel the weight, and you can feel the weight coming from the inside, which probably tells me it's more the glass elements inside than the outside. Now, this is a metal construction. There are some plastics and rubbers as well. But it's a solid lens. That other one was a little bit of metal. This had a little bit of metal, but it was, probably, I mean, it feels pretty good. But this 1.8 version, the nifty 50 version, was a little plasticky compared to the 1.2. But it had a nice solid feel. And my point is that even though it had a nice solid feel, you couldn't compare the technology back then to today. So that begs the question. Who needs pro glass? Back to this L series lens, right? This pro lens. Super fast focusing, right? Amazing glass technology. This is an EF. Now the RF lenses are out, which are even sharper. The material in these lenses is pretty fancy. I mean, it makes them feel extremely solid, a little heavy, but they could be a lot heavier if they were just steel. But a lot of these lenses use composites of magnesium and titanium and all these exotic metals, which just make them feel really good in the hand. Of course, they're heavier than regular lenses. These are Pro Series lenses. You still have the glass to account for, right? They just feel really good. And like I said, tack sharp, fast motors, just the best of the best, really. But does it mean because they're the best of the best that everybody should have it or everybody needs it? No. Especially considering the price range. I could end this video pretty quick and just tell you, if you're a pro photographer, if you're professional, then you need pro glass. If you're not a professional, then you don't need pro glass. You can settle for just regular, 1.8s or 1.4s or whatever you can get your hands on, right? You don't need the 1.2s. But those of us that have been shooting for a while know better. And those of us that know better know that that is not the case. Before we continue, it's water break time. If you don't have your water, go get it. Pause the video, grab some nice water, whatever you like, warm, hot, cold. put some stuff in it like tea, coffee, whatever it is. Hydrate yourself. There, done. So what are the biggest differences between a regular lens, right? Like a 50 millimeter 1.8 called the Nifty 50 or a 50 millimeter 1.2. Well, the biggest thing, and I'm going to grab this 1.4 just to have something in my hand to show you, but the biggest thing you're going to feel is, of course, the weight and the size. They tend to be bigger because the glass elements are bigger in diameter to let more light in. Because they're bigger glass elements, they weigh more. Also, they weigh more because they tend to be more metal than plastic. It's kind of one of those things where, you know, I'm thinking that even if the manufacturer could figure out a way to make it all plastic, they probably would use a little bit of metal in here just to make you feel like you're getting what you paid for, right? So you don't feel like, oh my gosh, I paid $1,500 for this and I'm getting this light plasticky thing. You know, I don't know. That's a good question, right? Would they just do it all plastic if they could? Because it would keep it lighter. And many photographers, that's all they care about. Just light equipment so they can go hiking or, you know, spend the whole day holding their camera by hand. It means a lot. So that's a good question. I guess we'd have to ask, you know, Canon or Nikon or Sony. But back to the core here. The size and the weight are the first things you notice, right? But when you get into it, it's the pictures, right? Now, we're not going to compare the two here. This is not that kind of video. You can do that by comparing like a Nifty 50 and then a 1.4 and then a 1.8 of the same lens, right? What you do when you see those videos is for pixel peepers, the people that have to enlarge images on the computer and just check out the pixels, these are the people that care. This is when a 1.4 L series or a 1.2 L series lens or even a 2.8 L series lens, right? Just a pro lens in general. Canon calls them L series, Nikon calls them something else, or Nikon, depending where you live. Sony calls them something else, and Sigma calls them art lenses. Doesn't matter what they are. They're pro glass, right? So these pro glass lenses are going to give you, when you look at a picture like of a brick wall, which many people love to shoot, you go in the middle of this picture and everything looks pretty sharp. With any lens, right? Basically. Unless they're really crappy lenses. But when you get into the pro glass, that's when you go up into the corners of the image and those bricks still look sharp, right? That's what you're paying for. You're paying for that sharpness all through the spectrum of that image, from edge to edge of that lens. Now you have to decide if that's important to you. If I'm out at a little river or creek or lake and I'm shooting, you know, lilies in the middle of the water and they're going to be in the center of my frame and I don't really care what's in the outside, I'm really kind of blowing my money on pro glass without really needing it. If the center of that frame is sharp, then a basic lens is probably all I need. Now for you Canon viewers, what does L mean, right? It used to be thought that L meant low dispersion glass, L, low dispersion glass, but apparently it's not exactly what it means. According to some of the old Canon documents, it meant luxury. It was their luxury lens division. So definitely a luxury when you consider the price you pay for these. So now the question, would I shoot a wedding with a non-pro glass lens? Well, the answer from me to you, just from so many years of experience, is no. But the reason might surprise you. It's not no because of the quality. Because to tell you the truth, even if you shot a wedding with a Nifty 50, you would get great results. I've gone out and I've shot with the Nifty 50 and then I've put this 1.4 L series 35 millimeter. Now it's a different focal length, but I'm looking at sharpness, I'm looking at color, and to tell you the truth, the difference is negligible. It really is. What am I getting? I mean, I'm getting a slight difference. I am. You know, there is improvement. So if I am one of those people that have to have the best of the best always, because I hate knowing that there's a slightly better lens out there that's going to be a little sharper, then you definitely need this, right? Or you want it. But for most of us, shooting your average wedding with a Nifty 50 versus that 50 millimeter 1.2, you're not going to see a whole lot. Now that 1.2 is going to give you better bokeh. You're going to get better depth of field, you know, blur. You're going to get a couple of advantages. You pay for that, right? But I'm talking about the average. If you're going to keep this thing on 2.8 or 4 f4 or even f8, and you just want nice sharp images and landscapes and whatever during the wedding, you're not going to see much of a difference. Now, why wouldn't I shoot it? Well, if it's not because of image sharpness and image quality, the reason is you walk into a wedding with a professional camera or a decent camera and you have this little pancake lens on there, it doesn't look good. I mean, honestly, you would think, oh, who cares what people think? No, if that's all you need to shoot the wedding, then that's what I'm going to use. Well, that's not always the case. See, the problem, I've been in so many weddings where Uncle Bob comes over and says, oh, you got the Canon 5D. This is when it first came out, right? It was a big thing. You got the Canon 5D Mark III. Wow, that's a beast. And I'd start conversation as well and say, well, what do you shoot, Uncle Bob? Well, I shoot a, whatever, an entry-level Canon or an entry-level Nikon. I'm like, well, that's all you need these days. Those are fantastic cameras. Then Uncle Bob proceeds to look at the lens. Oh, wow, you have a, 35 millimeter 1.4. That's a magnificent lens. If Uncle Bob had seen a 50 millimeter pancake on there, he would have wondered, what is his, niece paying for, right? What are her parents paying for? They're paying a photographer with, really simple equipment to shoot the wedding. People start talking. I've been in weddings where people, as you're walking in with the camera, half of the crowd is looking at your equipment and your lenses to see, your camera and your lenses to see, what is this photographer shooting with? And if you walk in there with an entry-level camera and a pancake lens, yes, I'm telling you right now, I can shoot an amazing wedding with that equipment. But everybody is going to say, this photographer doesn't have it, Look at the equipment, or they overpaid for this photographer. I mean, look at the equipment. That's a lack of respect. I would never go to a wedding with this equipment. So you have to be, if you're going to get into this business, you have to think about those things. It is important what people think. It may not be important in your career and what I mean by that is, if you want to start a business and you want to get into, being an entrepreneur in a certain area, yes, okay, don't listen to your family when they say, Juan, it's not a good idea. Well, there's a lot of competition, or writing a book sucks. People don't read. Yeah, you know what? Do what you need to do to be successful, right? That's the bottom line. But if you're a wedding photographer, if you're a portrait photographer, and you want to be serious and you want to be taken serious, you've got to walk in there with good equipment, because these are your tools. These are the tools of the trade, and you're going to be respected for your work, and you're going to be respected for your tools as well. So it comes down to status, right? What are you driving? What are you driving when you walk into that wedding? Now, this is an 80s camera. This is the Canon F1, but back in the day, it was the beast. As a matter of fact, if I drop this right now on this glass top table, it's going through the table this way. I don't know how much this weighs. It's a ridiculous. Look at the size of the lens. The lens is nothing. This camera is so heavy. But that's what you wanted to be doing back in the 80s. You wanted to have a camera like this when you went into a wedding, or a medium format camera. And nowadays, you want to have a full sensor camera. Crop sensor is okay, but you want to have a full sensor because it gives you a little more versatility, and a good lens. You want to walk into that wedding and you want to dominate. But can I shoot a wedding with a prime lens like this, like a 1.8 50 millimeter nifty 50, or a 35 millimeter 1.8, or a, like a 100 millimeter 2.8, just have a couple of primes that are really basic, not professional glass? Yes. And if the people don't care, especially if you're starting out and they're not getting, they're not paying you a lot because they know you're starting out, you're not charging a lot of money. If you walk in there with like a 35 millimeter 1.8, a 50 millimeter 1.8, and like an 85 millimeter or 100 millimeter 1.8, and you did that wedding with those lenses, you would get fantastic shots and nobody would say anything. So back to the question that this video is meant for. Who needs pro glass? So it's not who, it's what you do that decides. If you're shooting images where edge to edge matters, like if you're shooting documents and the writing in the corners is as important as the writing in the middle because somebody's going to read this later on. If you're shooting historical documents, even for yourself as a hobby, right? You don't have to be a pro. You're going to need that pro glass. And you're going to have to know how to use it. You're going to have to set the aperture way high, like f8 or f11. close it down so there's no depth of field issues. You're going to have to know how to use your equipment, but it helps to have that pro glass. If you're a pixel peeper, if you're just that kind of a person that shoots and every image you decide to hang or that you like, you're going to enlarge to like 100 or 200% and you're going to look at the pixels throughout, then you better be buying a pro lens. It doesn't matter if you're a pro or not, you're going to need that pro lens. If you're doing anything scientific, then you're probably going to need a pro lens. If you're doing anything scientific for money, you definitely need a pro lens, because now you don't want to risk that there's another lens out there that's a little sharper. It may cost $1,000 more, but it's a little sharper, right? For you and I, that might not matter. For somebody doing science experiments, that might mean the world. If you're a pro sports photographer or an enthusiast sports photographer, you don't have to be a pro, you're going to need lenses that focus really fast. And typically, these professional lenses have faster focusing motors. If you're buying anything extreme, whether it's an extremely wide angle lens or an extreme telephoto like a 600, those are sometimes not even offered. Well, no, actually now they are. Canon's offering regular lenses, not pro, 600 and I think 800. But if you're going to use those lenses on a really serious level, like things that are moving fast and the lens has to track, then the pro glass is going to make a difference. Now, if you're just using them to shoot birds or animals at the zoo, or like you're tracking airplanes at an air show, you probably don't need pro glass. You're probably fine with, a regular 600 or 800 millimeter lens. If you are making mega enlargements, like you're just selling or using enlargements like 40 by 60 inch, then you probably want to stick with, at one point, you want to start migrating to Pro Series glass. And you probably want to, at that point, even consider the camera you're buying, because it's going to make a difference. The same applies for high cropping ratios. If you're the kind of photographer that just can't get close enough to whatever it is, and you're going to be cropping later on, then you want a good camera with high megapixels, and you want a lens that's going to allow you to do that, right? You want the sharpest lens you can buy for the money, and sometimes that ends up being a Pro Series lens. And of course, we mentioned, good impressions, right? If you're in that kind of a business where your customers are looking to see what kind of equipment you have, then it matters, right? I remember I told in one of the videos, one of my first videos, I mentioned a poster. It was a billboard, actually, not a poster. It was a billboard on the highway, and it was for a Bugatti Veyron, the automobile. And at the bottom of the ad for the car, it said, photographed by Hasselblad, or with a Hasselblad. They were very proud of the fact that that automobile, multi-million-dollar car, was shot with a camera that at the time was like a $40,000 camera, where you could buy a really, really, really good camera for $6,000 and a really good lens for another $2,000. This was a $50,000 or $40,000 camera, probably with a $10,000 lens, and they used it to photograph their car, or they paid a photographer to use the camera to photograph their car. So, does it matter? Yes, of course it matters. Sometimes impression is everything. Outside of these things we just talked about, like sharp edge-to-edge pictures, something that needs to be exclusively sharp, high cropping ratios, whatever, the enlargements. Outside of these things, and maybe one or two more that I'm leaving out, if you can think of them, put them in the comments. Outside of this, you don't really need Pro Series glass, whether you're a pro or not. You might be a pro portraiture photographer, and if you have a 50 millimeter 1.4, you're probably going to get enough, bokeh or bokeh, I throw these around, that you're fine with that lens, right? Even a 1.8 might be enough. Or you might buy the 100 millimeter 2.8, right? Which is not the Pro Series. The Pro Series is also 100 millimeter 2.8. It's going to be a little sharper. So portraits tend to be a little soft anyway. You want them to be a little soft. You want the eyes to be really sharp, but you want the rest of it to be, not dreamy, but you want it to be a little soft, right? So if you have a regular versus a Pro Series 2.8 lens, 100 millimeter, is it going to matter for portraits? Probably not. Is it going to matter in your head? That's up to you. Are you going to lose sleep at night because you could have bought the Pro Series and you didn't? You decided to save $800, $900, and you bought the regular one? That's up to you entirely, right? But Can you pull that off? Absolutely. You get a nice camera and you get that regular 100mm 2.8, you're going to take all the portraits in the world that you can think of, and they're all going to be fantastic. So pro or not, if you're not doing something special that really requires a pro series lens, you might want to save the money. For what? Well, for anything. I mean, for investing, for starting a business, for anything you want, for taking a vacation, or for buying a better camera. Because here's the thing, cameras will continue to become, they're like computers, right? Megapixels are higher, everything's higher. Lenses, you can hold a lens for 20 years. If a lens is good, like my EF lenses, if I get, one of the R cameras, like the R5 or the R6, I'm probably going to keep my EF lenses and just start buying the R lenses I don't have, right? So I don't have my 24 to 70 2.8 anymore, so I'm probably going to get the R version of that, the RF. But, for my 70 to 200, I'm going to keep my EF. This 1.4 35mm, I'm going to keep this EF. I don't find the need, to replace that with an RF lens. So keep that in mind. Your lenses can go 15 to 20 years. When I got rid of my 24 to 70, it was at the 16-year mark, and it was still a wonderful lens. So I got rid of it for, reasons that I don't want to talk about in this video because it'll just make it longer. But the point is, you can hold on to lenses for a really long time. Cameras, on the other hand, their features, their focus tracking, their, image stabilization, everything gets so much better so quickly. Over 3 to 5 years, your camera is nothing like it used to be. So the new ones are nothing like what they used to be, or you can say that what you have now is like lacking compared to the ones that are coming out. So it does make a difference. Invest your money on a new camera every 5 years if you want to, but buy decent lenses for what you need. Now, if you're thinking of getting into a field later on that might require pro glass, like if you've been wanting to become a sports photographer professionally, and you're already, kind of touching that area, and you're doing a lot of local stuff, but you're just about to break into professional sports photography, then definitely start investing in pro glass. So that's basically the gist for today's video. I didn't want to make it longer. It depends on what you're doing, not what you are. Whether you're pro or not doesn't matter. It depends on what you're doing. Keep in mind what you're doing, what you wish to do in the near future with your photography, and if you need these pro series lenses, then go ahead and invest in them. If you think that you can save that money and apply it towards other cameras or the gear like bags and filters and all kinds of stuff, I would use the money on that stuff instead. And get yourself some decent, maybe not the 1.8s, but you don't have to get the 1.2s. Maybe you can get the 1.4s, right? Like a middle ground, right? You don't have to spend the most money. You don't have to get the cheapest ones either. So that way you get a lens like a 50mm 1.4 is a nice kind of middle ground, right? You're not getting the 1.2, which is like $2,200, but you're not getting the nifty 50, which is, I think for the RF lenses, it's like $200 or $250 for the Canon RF mount. So it's a nifty 50, it's a 1.8. If you get the 1.4, it's going to be probably, I don't know, $400 or $500, and it's going to be a magnificent lens. We are done for today. I hope this was useful. If anything, just to spark a little thought, maybe save you a few dollars, please like below. If you enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know when I have another video. And I will see you all in the next video. From the bottom of my heart, as always, love you guys. Please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Ciao for now.